So we said earlier that in the fossil record, the typical pattern that you see is that types of animals and plants appear abruptly and disappear, but we don't really see evidence of evolutionary transitions. Now, there are a handful of cases, most of them from the fossil record of vertebrates, animals with backbones, in which evolutionists argue here we have an evolutionary case. And one of the classic examples is what's known as the fish tetrapod transition. So in the part of the geological record that we call the Devonian, and particularly in the Upper Devonian, we have a series of fossils where we have some fish which are rather tetrapod-like in appearance. Tetrapods are animals that have 4 limbs and digits rather than fins. But these fish, they have fins, they are fish, but they look rather tetrapod-like. They're kind of got flattened bodies and flattened skulls, and their skull is a little bit sort of alligator-like, and they look a bit tetrapod-like. And then we also have, in the rocks, a little higher in the sequence, we have some tetrapods. But these are tetrapods that look a little bit fishy. So they have limbs with digits, but the digits are weird because they have multiple digits. Instead of 5 fingers, they might have 8 fingers or 7 fingers. They have a lateral line, some of them, sense organ that we find in fish. They have bony fin rays on the tail. They have external gills. So they're tetrapods, but they look a bit fish-like. And then we find more typical tetrapods a bit higher up in the geological sequence. And evolutionists say, well, here's a classic transition. Fish evolved over millions of years into the first tetrapods with limbs and digits, and here are the animals that show this transition. Creationists interpret this whole sequence very differently. So we believe that before the flood, there was an environment called a floating forest. This has been reconstructed from studies of the plant fossils that we find in these rocks. And this has been reconstructed as a huge continent-sized floating ecosystem. It's floating over the deep ocean, composed of plants that effectively formed a kind of continent-sized ecosystem of a kind that we simply don't have in existence today. And because it was an environment that was sort of transitional between sea and land, it wasn't quite land because it was floating on the ocean, but it wasn't quite a marine environment either. It was sort of a transitional environment, probably with lots of pools of water on the surface. It was populated. God designed animals that populated that particular environment, that were designed to live in those shallow pools and to support themselves in the water. Even though they're tetrapods, they're living in this sort of floating mat environment in these shallow pools. So that's how we sort of understand it. They're designed animals, they're designed to live in a particular environment that we don't have today, that was ripped apart and buried at the time of the flood. And recently, in fact, I did a statistical study where I looked at the fossil animals that make up this supposed evolutionary transition from fish to tetrapods, and I was looking at their overall similarity to see whether statistically I could actually tell the difference between fish and tetrapods, because from an evolutionary perspective you'd expect there to be a complete continuum. Okay, this is a transition, so there shouldn't be any clear place where you can draw the line and say, well, these are tetrapods and these are fish. So in my analysis, if evolution is correct, I shouldn't really have been able to tell the difference. They should have just all sort of merged together as one big cloud of animals. Actually, I found that consistently, when I studied multiple data sets, I could find them clustering separately. The tetrapods were very definitely different from the fish, with a gap between them that was not filled by fossil forms. So that was consistent with the creationist prediction that we made, that they were separate creations of God.